Hey, you're under contract. Congratulations on your new real estate transaction. This is an exciting time, but it can also be a little bit overwhelming. That's why we're here to help you every step of the way. In this process, I'll briefly walk through some of the most important stages of the transaction. One crucial note, this video is not intended to replace the expert advice you'll get from your agent. They will be with you every step of the way and will make sure you're informed, advised, and protected. With that said, let's get started. We'll start at the beginning with earnest money. This is a sum of money that the buyer puts down, typically within a few days of the contract being signed, to show the seller that they're serious about buying their home. It's a way of saying, hey, I'm committed to this purchase. The amount of earnest money due is typically around 1% or so of purchase price, but it can definitely vary from transaction to transaction. The amount due on your purchase is outlined in your contract. If the buyer fails to provide earnest money by the deadline, the seller may have the right to terminate the contract. Next up, we have the home inspection, which is an examination of the home's condition for the buyer by an inspector of their choice. It's a really crucial part of the transaction, so I'm going to take a little extra time to explain it. The inspector will examine key systems such as electrical and plumbing, and the home's structure, foundation, roof, and more. The goal of the inspection is to identify any issues or potential issues that could impact the value, safety, or use of the home. To choose an inspector, buyers will often ask their real estate agent for recommendations, but they should also always do their own research to choose someone they trust. Now, in Colorado, home inspectors are not required to be licensed or certified, but many are members of national organizations like the American Society of Home Inspectors. These inspectors are trained to high standards and hold themselves accountable to a code of ethics. Okay, after the inspection, the buyers have some options and deadlines to exercise those options. First, they can simply accept the property in the condition that it's in. Second, they can submit an inspection objection notice. Or third, if they feel they need to, they can terminate the contract. Most transactions will involve an inspection objection. The inspection objection deadline is the deadline by which the buyer needs to submit a written objection to the seller regarding any issues found during the home inspection. This objection can include a request for repairs or a request for a credit to be applied towards the purchase price. These requests will be reviewed by the seller with their agent so they can make decisions about how they'd like to proceed. The inspection termination deadline is the deadline by which the buyer needs to terminate the contract if they're really not satisfied with the results of the home inspection. This date is typically between the inspection objection and inspection resolution deadlines. It provides an easy way for a buyer to indicate that they don't want to move forward without an objection because they simply decided the home isn't going to be okay for them. In our experience, it's not used frequently at all because most of the time buyers prefer to submit an objection and see what the seller says, but it's up to the buyer's discretion completely. Next, we have the inspection resolution deadline, which is the date by which the buyer and seller need to come to an agreement regarding any issues raised on the inspection objection. If the buyer and seller fail to come to an agreement by the deadline, the contract may terminate. This is one of the key moments when your agents will make a big difference for you regardless of which side of the transaction you're on. Now, right around the same time that the inspection negotiations are occurring, the buyer will select a homeowner's insurance provider. Choosing homeowner's insurance is usually pretty quick, but it's also very important for the buyer. Before the property insurance termination deadline, buyers will look for a reputable insurance provider and compare quotes from multiple providers so that they and the sellers can rest assured that there won't be any problems later. Buyers, it's important that you ask your agent any questions that come up as you choose your insurance provider. Most buyers start with insurance companies they've already worked with, perhaps for their cars, but you shouldn't stop there since rates and coverage can vary widely. Sellers, this is one of those deadlines that will typically come and go without really coming to your attention unless there's something about the property that makes it uninsurable or prohibitively expensive to insure, which is pretty uncommon. The title commitment is another very important step in the process, which typically occurs about a week and a half into the transaction. This is a document issued by the title company that outlines the history of the property's ownership and any liens or encumbrances that may affect it. It also sets out the conditions under which the title insurance company will issue a policy to insure the property's title. It's essential for buyers to review the title commitment carefully because it can reveal issues that could affect their ownership or use of the property. For example, it could show that there's a lien on the property or that the property is subject to covenants, codes, or restrictions. We never want anyone to encounter any unpleasant surprises down the line. Again, sellers probably won't hear much about this step unless the title insurance company needs more information from them or if they identify a potential problem. So no news is good news. Buyers, the title commitment is long and it's boring, but be sure to read through it and any linked or attached documents and ask your agent or attorney any questions that arise. Now let's talk about the home appraisal. Most transactions will require an appraisal to be done. This is an estimate of the value of the property that's typically required by the lender to ensure that the property is worth the amount of the loan. The licensed appraiser will evaluate the property's condition, location, and other factors to determine its value. If the appraised value is below the purchase price, it can cause some issues that we'll need to resolve. For example, the lender is unlikely to be able to lend the full amount needed to purchase the property if the appraisal is low. In this case, buyer and seller will need to come to an agreement using strategies like price renegotiation, an additional cash contribution by the buyer, or both. Because of how messy that can get, it's in the seller's best interest to treat the appraisal inspection like they would a showing and have the property in tip-top shape, even though the appraiser will usually be in and out very quickly. Once we've made it through appraisal, things get a lot simpler, but we're not quite done yet. One of the things that the buyer will need to take care of before moving in is changing the utilities to their name. The first step is contact the utility company or companies and let them know that you'll be the new owner of the property. These utility companies are typically provided by the seller on the property disclosure or another document. The utility companies will transfer the account into the name of the buyer effective on the closing date. Since this date can move sometimes, we send out reminders when the time is right. Another deadline everyone needs to be very aware of is the loan availability deadline. This is the date by which the buyer needs to be confident there will be no problem securing their loan at closing. If something prevents the loan from going through and this date has passed, the buyer will typically lose their earnest money. Since this is usually the last termination deadline, it also means that the sellers can breathe a big sigh of relief that the transaction is likely to be smooth sailing after this date. While this is a critical moment in the transaction, it's important to know that it's actually pretty uncommon for buyers to terminate at this time or for them to have a need to terminate afterward. Your agents will be communicating with each other and the lender throughout the process to avoid any surprises. So if you do have any concerns, be sure to let your agent know. The one thing the buyers can do to mitigate any risks here is to continue the loan application process as soon as possible, like starting today, and to keep in touch with your lender throughout the entire process to ensure everything is on track. So, now we're approaching closing day. Congratulations, you're almost at the finish line. The final walkthrough and the closing itself are the last steps before the property officially changes owners. The walkthrough typically happens within 24 hours of closing, and it's the buyer's chance to make sure everything is in order before taking possession. During the walkthrough, the buyer and their agent will check to make sure that all of the agreed upon repairs have been made, all personal property is removed from the home, and that the property is in the same condition as when the offer was made. Sellers need to prepare for this by ensuring they have met all of those requirements and that they've cleaned the home for the new owners. Once the walkthrough is complete, we're ready for closing. At the closing, we'll finalize the purchase of the home and sign all of the necessary paperwork. To put it simply, the buyer will bring any additional funds needed to purchase the house, including any closing costs as instructed by their lender and title company. The lender will send the funds for the purchase, and the seller will bring the keys and sign over the deed. So, seller gets money, buyer gets house, lender gets promissory note. From the proceeds of the sale, the title company will pay off any balance for the seller so that the title is clear, and give the rest to the seller as a cashier's check or wire transfer. Once the licensed real estate brokers and title officers are satisfied that all requirements have been met, the property will be signed over to the buyers, and we are almost done. At this point, all that's left is high-five your agent for being a stellar advisor throughout the process. And if you really want to say thank you, introduce them with a quick text to anyone you know who might benefit from the same service you got. Buying or selling a home can be stressful, but you're in good hands. We've got it from here.